episode 47. We are coming up on 1 full year of KTLO. Happy to be with you on Friday. And what is today? Crafting the brouhaha. There's an interesting concept. Is there such a thing as a brouhaha that you could go to get a craft brouhaha? I don't know. Anyway, here we are.
You promised you weren't going to say that.
Yeah, I did. I lied. The core four, as we refer to ourselves, Patty Blackstaff in Western Canada, Greg Sanker in Oregon, and we have Simone Jo Moore in the southwest of France.
Bon après-midi.
And we have yours truly here in South Carolina. So it is another episode. And so today we're going to be talking about we're going to be using some words that may or may not be familiar to you. The brouhaha, crafting the brouhaha. What is a brouhaha? It's a noisy and overexcited reaction. What is a kerfuffle? Isn't it kerfuffle a great word? We're going to talk a little bit about the origins of kerfuffle. But the origins of brouhaha are, Simone?
Well, if you want to go back that far, 16th century.
In the French.
Yes, well, no, it actually started in Scotland. Not surprising when you think about, the Scots with all that wind and mountains and all that brouhaha, lifting skirts and all the rest of it. So, well, it really just means to, create disorder.
Kerfuffle, a kerfuffle is usually a commotion or a fuss.
Yeah.
And so Walter Blackstaff, who may or may not be related to Patty Blackstaff, I'm just we cannot disclose. Decided that there was such a thing as kerfuffalos, and kerfuffalos are those who are involved in kerfuffles. It's quite simple, really. And so we're going to talk about hurting the kerfuffalos. If you want to get in touch with any of us, here we are. These are our Twitter handles. We're all on LinkedIn. You can find us there. And we have a website at KTLOlearn.com if you'd like to go look at that. We advise you to do so when you have an opportunity. And we have some folks in the waiting room who are waiting to come in. We have Matt Beecher is coming in now. And we have Kathy Veldboom. And good morning. And thanks for joining, Matt. And there's Kathy. Yay. We are live on YouTube. And I have us in speaker view at the moment. So can
I just point out that Matt might have more instruments on screen than I do? I'm just saying.
Yeah, you're pretty strapped, aren't you, Greg?
I am pretty strapped, as you can see.
Oh dear. So today we're talking about the brouhaha and the kerfuffalo. So I'm going to start with Patty, since I'm the interviewer du jour. I'm going to start with Patty today. And what kind of problems cause the biggest kerfuffle, and that could even result in a brouhaha?
Well, according to Center for Management and Organizational Effectiveness, there are 5 main issues, 5 common problems that could cause a brouhaha. I'm going to go through them. 1, absence of clear direction, i.e. leader expectations. Difficulty blending multiple personalities into a cohesive and unified group. Our complex adaptive system of humans with all of our emotions. Number 3, failure to develop key competencies and behaviors. Are we training and upskilling, and do we have enough talent to accomplish what we need to achieve? And 4, poor communication and feedback, which includes transparency, listening, learning. 5, lack of awareness. So that's all encompassing with the culture, the environment, VUCA, the need for changing priorities. So these are all problems that boil down to humans. Almost every problem, even mechanical ones in an organization, usually are issues that are brought up from humans. So so a mechanical one could be the failure to inspect, and yet we put far less budget towards solving these as an organization than we do in, we spend a lot of money creating band-aids for them, but we don't often actually solve these top fives, which should be a priority for everyone from front lines all the way up to the board level.
So it sounds to me like that's no different from most of the other things we run into in organizations, that we're good at finding band-aids, but not very good at actually fixing stuff.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yes. So I this was a question that Simone had, and I find this one fascinating. Simone asks, and I'm asking Simone now, so maybe you can go explore this. Are our kerfuffaloes troublemakers, or are they agents of change? That's a fascinating question. I love it. Go for it, Simone.
I love, Patty, that you brought up VUCA. I really like VUCA. And what do I like more than VUCA? I like something that helps me understand it even better. And if you've been following some of the conversations, you will have heard a framework for helping us understand that. And it's like, can I even get out of here? Can Evan? And that's what it reminded me of. When I'm thinking VUCA, I'm thinking can Evan, I'm thinking, can I even get out of here? Organizations are dynamic flow of stability and instability. Okay, there is chaos. Chaos will come. And while these people may be, while the organization might be in a state of constant chaos, it doesn't mean that you as the leader or even they have to actually be in that state of mind while the kerfuffles are going on. Soren Kierkegaard said, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. And that's exactly what's happening when we're in these states. So it's really important, pay attention to your kerfuffle patterns and the behaviors that are happening. Because it may like, yeah, do you like that? The kerfuffle patterns.
I love kerfuffle patterns.
Hashtag kerfuffle pattern.
Yeah, kerfuffle patterns, because it's, quite often it's like all this sound and fury that's coming from our troublemakers or so-called troublemakers. But, and rarely does a kerfuffle really signify much. But if you pay attention to your kerfuffle patterns, remember there's a dangerous potential that if you're being too dismissive of what may seem to be small and insignificant, it's going to turn into something much larger, like a brouhaha, because your kerfuffalos are going to be feeling dismissed because you dismiss their kerfuffle. So these are the sorts of things we need to pay attention to. And I really like the French term for kerfuffle, because the verb is actually déranger, which means to derange something or to be deranged. I really like that term, because this is how we often view the folk that are stirring the pot, right? Oh, you're deranged. That's not going to happen, because it's social agitation. So as a leader, we might need to we need to wrangle that, and before a minor incident gets out of control. One of my favorites, Einstein, you can't solve a dignity problem with military force, right? So if you've dismissed a kerfuffler, there's going to be an awful lot of change. Whether they get changed or they're changing something that's happening, it will come into play. There's a benefit in the chaos. So when you think about, are they a troublemaker or a change agent? Coming from the Scots word fuffle, which means to throw into disorder. And that's what it's all about. There's something that's not happening for them. And so when we're in chaos, this is when we can discover, is this a philosophy issue or is it a science issue here? Engage them in as part of the solution team, because that's where the benefit is. You're really solving a knowledge problem, because our kerfuffalos have actually perceived something is twisted or it's bent, there's a discrepancy in their state of understanding of what's going on. So really, it's this problem that we're looking at, I had to do the air quotes for Greg. Here's my problem. It's connected to the intent to change a situation. So as Voltaire says, no problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking.
Well, I wait a minute. I think there are some mathematical problems that remain unsolved, but Voltaire was a pretty smart guy.
Well, the thinking is still going on those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sustained thinking is the key. So speaking of sustained thinking, Greg.
That was fortuitous. Awesome.
So we've explored this idea that there are kerfuffles in the organization sometimes that will just leap into the brouhaha, as it were. Aren't some people just kerfuffles? That are there people who are just drawn to the drama of disorder?
I think that yeah, there are people who enjoy drama. There's people who create drama. There's people who gossip and throw people under the bus and do all those kind of things. But I think I really like where Simone was going with that, is like frequently troublemakers or people that are bringing up issues, or the friction within an organization, is because there's an underlying issue that hasn't been addressed. I think of it as, it's the speck of sand that turns into a pearl. It's like it's agitating to the organization. So as a leader, I think we have to make a distinction between just general drama and harmful drama, because there's a message there. There's an opportunity to identify something earlier and something more important. And I like to call that, as a leader, I call that applying Dramamine. In other words, I need to understand what the difference between drama and actually meaningful change is. So that dissatisfaction that drives the kind of the drama is like, there's a message there, and the leaders need to see that. And so if you're constantly shutting people down, don't come to me, stop with the then people will, like you say, it'll explode somewhere else, but you won't benefit from that. As a leader, you won't be able to. And so being overly sensitive to you're just being dramatic and blah, 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 you're a gossip, you're a whatever, is denying you an opportunity to actually learn something important about the organization.
So the kerfuffle and the brouhaha serve a purpose. We know that one of the stages of forming teams is storming, right? It's working out the conflicts and getting into a little bit of chaos. So, Patty, where do we start as an organization when we're trying to solve some of the kerfuffles, or at least minimize issues that are brought about by the kerfuffles?
So I think I want to jump onto something Simone said about these agents of change and following your kerfuffle patterns. I want to expand on that, because we've been doing organizational change for years, and one of the things that we have found is the people that move the change fastest are what we like to call our positive deviants. They're the ones who are positive and willing and ready to jump away from the typical status quo. We also, though, don't buy into the whole resistance factor. We believe that it's resistance is and after the fact, it's responding to historical problems. Whereas response, if you look at resistance versus response, people are only simply responding to how you've prepared them for the change, right? So as an organization, we have to champion our positive deviance and be intentional with our culture, right? We have to take a look at where we're afraid, and we are afraid. When you talk about storming, there's also this fear at the top level when you put through a big change of storming the castle, right? And we all know the story of Beauty and the Beast. Well, the Beast didn't have a problem really with how he looked. That's not why everyone stormed the castle. They stormed the castle because he hid. He wasn't transparent. He locked the doors. He hid away. He was afraid of their response. And so in the end, they ended up storming the castle, right? So we have to take a look at what are we truly afraid of, so that we can avoid the kerfuffle and we can prepare people so that they respond properly. Roy, I don't know if it's Roy or Greg, but you often have mentioned, or several times in the last 47 episodes, you've mentioned falling back to default with our culture. So when we're moving through change, we have to remember that there is and last week we talked about that whole excitement of setting people up for the change, but then when the excitement's bigger than the reveal, that's what they do. They fall back to default. So we have to make sure that the reveal, or what is happening for them, is actually something that's going to move their behaviors forward. And that takes work. It takes a lot of training. It takes a lot of preparing, supporting, and building a learning organization. So as an organization, we want to be safe to fail. We want adaptability to be celebrated. We need to be quick to learn, and we don't learn until we actually do multiple feedback cycles, right? And then build leadership. So I can't stress this enough, and I'm not just because that's my competency, but honestly, we have to care about the context of how our leaders are working with the people and helping us meet those goals and those missions. If HR isn't at the table and is blind to the executive strategy, then their training budget ends up getting used for, a day out on laser tag instead of let's train up a solutions architect. Those are the things that as an organization, we have to take a step back. We have to take a look, champion those positive deviants, and pay attention to what we're afraid of.
Patty, I wanted to amplify something you said that is like, I think especially given a magnitude of change in an organization, that people watch the leaders. And one of the things that I've learned is they watch the leaders to say, should this be taken seriously? Are you taking it seriously? Or is this just play act in which we run out the clock and then back to life as usual? And
are you changing too?
Exactly. Because if you're not, then the strong implication or the meta message is I don't need to as a line employee. Yeah. Or if I do, and I've done this before, I've been young and naive. It's like, hey, this is where we're going. Let's do this. And a while down the road, I don't know, it depends on the organization, how far down the road you realize, oh, I was a schmuck. Everybody else knew that this wasn't going to go anywhere. How did they know that? I don't know. And I think that's why you emphasize, and I think the work that you do at the board level and at the C-suite level is so important, because you can't just phone this in at that level. If you're not living it, if you're not demonstrating it, if you're not showing in change behavior in yourself and in your colleagues in the way you work, nobody's going to change.
I can't phone in my leadership. What?
You can't even use a Zoom call to call it in.
I was going to say, except during a pandemic.
That's exactly right.
But you can chime in with Miracle Max and say, have fun storming the castle.
That was not research. I just want you to know that.
So I'm going to come back to you, Greg, as a busy executive. You've been a CIO.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the stuff that you have to get done? Obviously, you have to get stuff done, as you say, GSD. You often use that abbreviation.
Stuff. It's stuff. We got to get stuff done.
You mean besides phoning it in?
Yeah.
Besides phoning it in. But and you have to make time for people. You can't phone it in. You have to make time for people to tell you their problems, to express what they're seeing and what they're feeling or what they've noticed in the organization. How do you do that? How do you juggle those obligations?
Well, first and foremost, I will say that it is when you sit at the C-suite. And I'm not patting myself on the back, because I learned a lot doing this. Meaning, I was not the best prepared for that, but you learn a lot sitting there. And one of the things is, I've got a strategic, like, my career ends in a week and a half if I don't deliver on this. And then somebody comes in your office, hey, Greg, I was going to chat with you. So we've got these two databases and they're really not reconciling near the backup process. And I'm concerned that someday, it's like, stop talking. I'm fighting for my life. I've got these And you can't do that, because what they're talking about is the most important thing. That's the work of the organization. And you've got to be able to understand the kind of the ebb and the flow. And one of the things that so often I hear so much in the leadership realm talking about, supporting people, and it's all about people and uplifting people and da, da, da. And sometimes I think, don't you people have jobs? Don't you have real jobs? Because we are hired to get stuff done. At the end of the day, we have to deliver. This isn't about making everybody feel good. And yet, informed, forward-looking leaders, what I'm calling digital leaders, and Patty is got some content around this and coaching and whatnot that she does, but digital leaders behave different. And part of that is about understanding the difference between curating the culture and encouraging curiosity, creating safety for people to learn and to grow and to fail, because you genuinely believe that that's how you're going to get stuff done. That's how you're going to be more productive and achieve those more strategic goals that you have to deliver as a leader. And it's very, it feels very antithetical, because it would be really easy to turn around to the staff that report to you and to your organization and say, look, that's all fun and games. Let's have Taco Friday. But at the end of the day, I just need you guys to get stuff done. In other words, status quo, don't change anything, da, 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 da. And we really, if you're the kind of leader that when that gentleman walked into my office, and I'm picturing somebody very specific, by the way, when they walk into your office, and if they start telling you your problem, and if you're a recovering technologist like I have been, is you might say, ooh, I know the answer to this. Let me tell you what you need to do. Go do this and this and this and this and this. You've created a dependent culture where you're the only smart guy in the room. And if you follow that through with, well, I hope you had fun doing it your way, because your way failed. And if you had done it my way, and as a leader, you've created a toxic culture simply because you think you know the answer to a question, as opposed to supporting, encouraging, developing, empowering people who can be actually effective leaders. And that's on you. That's on you, the leader. And you have to be vulnerable. You have to be adapt, and you have to take some risk. You may not survive the next week and a half or the next month and a half, but if you don't do it this way, you'll never be truly successful. Hey, NJ, thanks for joining.
Morning, NJ. So that brings us to the questions of how shall we say, mitigate the brouhaha and herd the kerfuffles. And Simone, maybe you can give us some tips, and since you are a proponent of the chaos that exists, how do we make sure that when we herd the kerfuffles, we're pointing them in the right direction or in a positive direction?
Live for the chaos. No, it's just so cool, because when Patty was talking about, we'd like to avoid the kerfuffle, I actually like to think of it, those kerfuffles are like an outlet. I have a great love of volcanoes for various reasons. A huge interest in it. My father used to live only 30 miles from one in Indonesia for his years there, and all the wonderful things that happen. And you've got to pay, as I said, you've got to pay attention to your kerfuffle patterns. I actually see them as outlets. And so when I think of prevention, I'm thinking, well, we're keeping our pulse on what's happening. Where are the rumbles? Where are the little jets of steam? The sulfur is starting to get a little stronger, things like that. So sometimes, and actually, NJ, you might know this person, but Steve Maraboli, he's a great behavioral science speaker, and he spent some time in security forces in the Air Force and stuff like that. And he's a really cool dude. And he said, look, sometimes problems don't require a solution to solve them. Instead, they actually require maturity to outgrow them. And I think that's actually a really interesting thing, isn't it? Like, if we're going to mitigate them, but
I'm in big trouble.
Yeah. Mediating the madness is how I see it sometimes. If we're going to, mitigate and herd it, it's mediating. And mediation skills have often been underrated in leadership. We think about negotiation skills in sales and marketing and all that kind of stuff, but mediation skills is part of negotiation. And it's also part of the very important thing of directing people on a human level. It does require empathy. It does require emotional agility and intelligence. It requires compromise. It is not a dirty word, people. Compromise actually means something very special to me. There's the ability that we need to have to signpost in how we direct people's steps towards the realization of what's going on. So we're not just picking them up and putting them there. We're actually letting them find the way, but we're guiding and directing them towards what's going on. I mean, there was a time, it was one of my early management mistakes, I think, or leadership shape. There was a time I put 2 of my miscreants, I like to call them, in the boardroom once. And I let my anger show because, like you were saying, Greg, I've got to get stuff done. And I was really peeved. Their behavior was really childish. It was really unacceptable about what was going on. And I just literally turned around and said, I expect better from you guys. This is not acceptable behavior. And I gave them some guidelines and I said, call me back in when you're ready to talk to me about how you're going to resolve this. And, it works to a certain extent, but on the other, you've got to also then add the other mediation side of into it. I mean, it's designed to resolve disputes, but it's based on the value of a claim. Someone said this and this is going on, but it's a claim. There's no proof of it yet. So mediation is something that's got to be continuous. It has to be present in all your activities. And the single biggest problem about communication is that it's actually an illusion that it's taken place. Because if you've got kerfuffles and that incident has gone into a brouhaha to the point you need mediation, then if you need to include mediation within it, that communication was just an illusion. It hasn't actually taken place. So really, when we're talking about compromising, most of people see it as a negative thing. If I give you this and you've got to give me that. What people have forgotten is understanding that compromise is not a win-lose. If you break the 2 words down, it's a communicated promise. That's what compromise is. It's a communicated promise. And any effective mediator, which is a leadership skill, absolutely glows with empathy. And people will sense that and they will open up to that.
Cool. Thank you, Simone. It's good insight. I like that. Communicate the promise. I like that concept for compromise. So, Patty, who do you think, how do you determine responsibility for taking care of the kerfuffles and doing the care and feeding of the herd?
So I'm going to touch back on something Simone said where she mentioned avoiding the kerfuffles. The point not made earlier, Simone, and because I'm agreeing with you 100%, the point not made earlier when I was talking about, not storming the castle was that there is a significant amount of kerfuffles that could be avoided. And drama, like you said, Greg, that could be avoided by preparing people properly, communicating and what have you. And I do agree, those positive deviants, it's attitude, right? So the attitude of how you see a kerfuffle before it gets to leading into that brouhaha is how you see it. Is it really a kerfuffle? Is it really something that we need to address? And in terms of feeding, watering, and herding the kerfuffles, listen, it's an all organization thing. Ultimately, the highest level leadership, right? What we tolerate, we propagate. And we've used that expression for the entire year that we've been on here. Individual leaders, though, own solutions for their team. How you gather the information and solve it is specific to the team itself. And in an organization, we hear about, it really is, culture is top down. And I don't care what anybody says. You can have those pockets of happiness. You can have this wonderful team that is exempling a better way to the rest of the organization, but it is extremely rare for those to affect the greater org in a long tail manner. You need to have the top people in the organization define culture, attitude, acceptability, tolerance, Teams, teams, though, can define how to stop the baffling shenanigans. They can define for themselves what they're willing to accept and not accept. They can say, I'm going to have a no-jerk rule. It's just going to happen, right? That person's not welcome on our team, and we're not going to hire for that. So there are some specific things that are ultimately the highest level leadership, in my opinion, that needs to define an intentional culture. But then you as an individual, you're responsible for your own self-awareness. You're responsible for growing that, for becoming a better you in self-awareness. Greg and I talk offline a lot about digital leadership and self-awareness and emotional intelligence is a conversation Simone and I are always having. When you are wanting to grow, you have to put your attention. You must put your attention to intentional culture.
As opposed to accidental culture, which is what an awful lot of organizations have, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, what's happening today? Who knows? Let's just get through it. Yeah. Well, look, it's a kerfuffle.
Well, a lot of it's reactionary, right? If you're allowing your culture to be organic per se, what you're saying is, I am not going to own the ability to make sure that we're headed the direction that is actually going to meet this mission.
And there's nothing wrong with organic. It just depends on the type of compost you're putting on.
Okay, then.
Have you ever worked for an organization where the way the day is going to be, or the way the culture is based on the way the boss comes in the morning? Everybody's on pins and needles, and it's like, oh my gosh, don't have that meeting. Everybody cancel. Or it's like, ooh, this would be the day to ask to have him sign that PO. He's in a good mood.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Well, we have people with us today.
Yes, we do.
Look at us. We have a lovely group here on KTLO. We have NJ Robinson, who's in a smiley mood today. Hi, NJ. We have Kathy Veldboom, and we have Matt Beecher. Matt, this is your first time with us on KTLO. Welcome.
He's
Nice
kind
to
of
see
my
you.
fault. I blame myself. Sorry, Matt.
Well, everything is your fault, Greg, so we just assume that.
I know that. Look, if you notice, I mentioned this earlier, but Matt wasn't able to hear me. It's like he wins the prize for the most instruments on screen on a live broadcast.
What can I say? He's just stringing you along.
I was just happy to tune in, guys.
Oh! Well, on that note, we're gonna throw the floor open for you folks to chime in here. You've been listening to a little bit of this conversation about brouhaha and kerfuffles, and the one term that came out of today so far is the kerfuffle pattern. And what I would do, you have to, when you make change, you have to redevelop patterns. And speaking of patterns, kerfuffle pattern isn't that fun to say, kerfuffle pattern? So what I want you to do right now is to mentally, internally say kerfuffle pattern, kerfuffle pattern, kerfuffle pattern, kerfuffle pattern. And what happens after you do that is that kerfuffle pattern will now sound incredibly wrong. So there you go.
Ever do that thing where you say your name 100 times and you think that's not even a name?
It's not even a name. So Kathy, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here, and I'm going to ask you about kerfuffle patterns. See, I couldn't say it. Kerfuffle patterns that you've seen. How did you deal with it? Was it positive, negative? What did you think?
All of the above. And I missed the beginning of how you all define kerfuffle, but I think I got the gist of it. First of all, I think, you spoke about culture a little bit. I think it is important to us to place a strong emphasis on open communications. But even when there are open communications, there are going to be kerfuffles. There are going to be situations that arise because of unexpected change announcements that maybe you weren't even privy to. There, acquisition rumors, different things that go on about that. You can get an undertow of conversation. Sometimes it is reactionary. sometimes it is just people trying to figure out their own emotions and own thoughts about a situation. So they may start, I think of kerfuffles, the ones that happen that you see or hear about, you can do something about. The ones that are the undertow, and then all of a sudden there's a swelling and everyone's been talking about it. And oh my gosh, what do you do? Well, I think in that case, you open a Q&A session with your entire team, because you want everybody to hear the questions. You want everybody to hear the answers. With that said, I think kerfuffles, setting an environment of mutual respect, making sure that people understand that when people behave in that manner, and I don't use those exact words, it is that someone feels very strongly about something, right? Or it probably wouldn't happen. Whether they're a reactive person is a whole different situation. A person that is reactive reacts in every situation. And yes, that becomes a toxic thing to your culture. But when it is something that swells up, it is important to remember that if it's with two people and it's not someone bringing a situation to you, is that you've taught them the importance of what Brene Brown calls rumbling, which is to come into this, to teach them that the two people or three or four or five or however many, when you come into a situation, you're thinking very passionately about something, so is the other person. So you come into it with as much passion to be heard as to understand the other. And that really is then when things are blowing up and you're even hearing about it, or it is something that blows up at your direction or whatever it is a lot of times there's fear, there's questions that are unanswered, there's questions unanswered that created the reaction to the situation. And I think if you've set the right culture up front, you are the tour guide to lead your team through each one, so that people then, if you need to be consistent, and if they see your leadership style through these situations, they hopefully will grow and learn. And when the kerfuffles happen between departments, it's there are more things beyond your control. But that's how that's my 2 cents on it today.
I feel like you gave us more like 6 or 8 cents right there.
Yeah,
Maybe I'd like my change back.
Yeah,
I love the idea of the concept of the tour guide. Yeah. That's great. That's terrific. The Rick Steves of organizational.
There we go.
There you go. Matt, going to put you on the hot seat. First time on, and here you are, getting on the hot seat right away. So we'll see if you string us along, or if we can mend a learn from you. Don't get me started, please. Don't. Just stop me now.
It started a long time ago.
So you've been listening as we've been talking about brouhahas and kerfuffles, and how they can positively affect organizations or negatively affect organizations. What have you seen in your career as in terms of learning from kerfuffles?
Sure, just a few basic things to mention. I think, first of all, thanks for having me on, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity. It is very early for me here, and everything you've said pretty much jives with a lot of where I'm at for just a setting. My background, I went to school for conflict resolution. So when you were speaking of negotiation and mediation and the importance of that is near and dear to me on an educational level, not so much on a leadership of an organization level, but I often am watching leaders in organizations and have that purview of looking for the toxic culture and seeing how people react. And I'm still a student, even though I graduated long ago. And first of all, the terminology you guys use is wonderful. I mean, mediating the madness, talking about kerfuffalos. I mean, puns about my office. This is good stuff. I really enjoy that. And I think what was sticking out to me and some of the conversation is, what we can do as leaders to manage that chaos that can happen, and to listen is important. But what always hits me the hardest, and maybe it's just where I'm at in my organization currently, is how are we training people up to become the leaders? I preach about psychological safety probably more than I should. Kathy, you were just saying, setting that environment of mutual respect. And I love that because that sets the table. Having those ground rules is super important. But half the time when I'm working with people in the IT industry, they're telling me, well, you can train technical skills, but you can't train soft skills. They resist the idea of evolving how they approach a situation. I worked at a company here in Oregon. It was very hierarchical, a lot of military background. It was nuclear industry, and engineers are very black and white. They don't necessarily seem to believe that you can have soft skills because you can't prove it. So how do we go about raising awareness of psychological safety? The tour guide idea, 100%, we model it through who we are and how we approach conflict. I've always promoted what I like to call the conflict positive culture. Coming into this today saying, how do we turn, like, are those deviants, are they positive for the company or are they a drawback? I think that all depends on how your culture is and how your leaders address it. If you are skilled in engaging the conflict, you can pull a lot of important data out of that conversation to change things. If your management team is ill-equipped, if your leadership team is aloof to the situation or doesn't have the time, then you're going to have this toxic culture. These deviants will indeed, I think, become more and more of a problem for your organization than a benefit. And eventually they'll leave. And then we get into attrition and all the reasons why you should engage in conflict. So for me, I think my question, putting it forward, is how do we, as people who understand the benefits of all this, how do we not only preach it to our teams, but how do we teach it? How do we instill it? How do we take those inexperienced in this arena of information and bring them in and get them to believe it? How do we get them to trust us? I think we've all been at that training where every one of the people in the room is rolling their eyes and don't believe what you're about to tell them. So that's the kerfuffle I have, is how do we get people to see the benefit of a conflict positive culture and live it?
That is a really important point. It's come up a number of times before, Matt. How do you get people to see what they don't see? In other words, I'm predisposed not to even understand that that's a thing, let alone know its value. So how do we open your eyes to something that you're not seeing? Brilliant.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. Thank you for contributing to the group here today.
And he got a penny clap. Did you notice that she's on mute clapping? That's not as frequent as you might think.
Don't you know, Greg? There's more over here too.
Yes.
By the way, Matt,
I don't see one of these on your screen.
Ooh, no ukulele. That is true.
Nice.
That's in my doctor's office.
well, the ukulele may not fit well, but there's always room for cello. Coming to you, NJ, you have some thoughts about what Kathy was saying earlier, I think. You want to jump in?
Yes. Am I coming across pretty good?
Perfect.
Okay, great. And I think this also speaks a little to what Matt was talking about how, how do you institutionalize a certain culture of safety and conflict safety? I say it's modeling it, and bringing also into Kathy's point, like she mentioned something. She said people come to conversations with the same passion, exuberance, and so I like that because I talked to my new team here, and I'm kind of dealing with a little bit of, we have people, so we're an Air Force organization we're bringing in Navy transplants. And so there's a lot of conflict there. And I talk about the importance of understanding that when we come to conversations or kerfuffles, there we go, don't get that word in there, we don't come as blank slates. Like to Kathy's point, we come with the same exuberance, but we also come with our own understandings, our own backgrounds, and if you have it, our own baggage. And so as leaders, we need to understand that important fact, because so I talk about this, and I talked about communication model. I talk about the noise, and this noise is all those different things. It's not just a physical thing, like, so we're in the COVID environment, we take a noise as like the baby crying, the dog barking, that's interrupting communications, but our own minds, our own perceptions, our own biases, and our own baggage disrupt the message that we communicate, and it also disrupts how it's received as well. So as leaders, we need to really understand that, and how do we bridge that gap? It's through practice for one, but also getting to understand the other side of the story, understanding the person that we're communicating with. And I put it on the leader as having the responsibility of really, to the best of their ability, putting themselves in the shoes of the person whom we're speaking with to understand what those disruptors could be. So great to be here. Love it. I look forward to this every week.
Great. Thanks, NJ. Always good to hear from you, and glad you could join us today. In the midst of your, as Greg says, GSD, getting stuff done.
Yes.
So we're going to come back to Patty here, because I think she has some specific advice about what organizations can do and maybe a little bit of how they can do it. Let's talk about some of the practical solutions to dealing with the kerfuffles and herding the brouhaha. No, you can't herd the brouhaha, can you? Herd the kerfuffles, but you can't herd the brouhaha. Stir the brouhaha, perhaps.
Listen, I think one of the most beautiful things that we have going on in organizations is when we understand and we take intentional thought around, and I've used intentional a lot because it's work. We have to plan these things, but organizations and humanity are together. They unless we are looking at them as equal pieces to the whole pie, we're looking at it incorrectly, right? Many people weigh their desire to come to you with a problem long before they walk in your door. They really stew about how they're going to present it, what they're going to do, who has to take ownership. And as a leader, your job, honest to goodness, to say, what's my responsibility in that? What's my role in this? And when a problem arises, you're not a character in the story. Like as Kathy said, you're a guide, right? In fact, when others are going through things, you might just be sitting in the cheap seats because you absolutely don't have a close-up view of what's going on. So you need to get closer in terms of learning more and finding facts. Conflict's a cool thing, Matt. Thanks for bringing that to the table, because it's about attitude and how you see things. It's only a problem if you look at it as a problem, right? It's, yeah. So the best organizations contribute to growth. But I was on a call with Robert Keegan from Harvard on Thursday, I think, and he said you have to stop your second job. And I kind of, He said, people spend an inordinate amount of time proving themselves rather than getting stuff done. And so if you're looking at your culture and people are so busy proving themselves, then you are looking at fear. You are not looking at excited, willingness to challenge, the ability to move forward. If you're posturing, you're not dancing, right? If you're posturing and putting on, I worked for an organization as a consultant. I came in, and I got to say, I spent 92% of my time proving to a CIO or CEO, pardon me, who was afraid of technology, that the work we were doing was actually viable and going to make a difference. And it all was seated in his fear because he was not technically savvy enough to know the difference between what I was saying and what his team was saying. So in this beautiful form of company, and people are at equal levels, the humans in the company, it's a symbiotic understanding that without each other, there isn't a company to function. It just doesn't exist. The brouhahas are the result of our failure to create space where people can trust each other, where people can collaborate. And that takes leadership. And I want to address a little bit for you, Matt, in my opinion on what we can do for leaders. We have to stop seeing training as an event. We absolutely need to see training as an everyday activity. So that means multiple levels. That means we're going to have individuals coached in self-awareness so they're actually prepared to address the system. We need to make sure there are everyday capabilities for them to use what they're learning. We need deep learning situations where they're not just small bites, which is what everyone's asking for right now, but you have to combine the two. Deep learning followed by small bites with action-oriented practicality that also gives the leaders some meat to be able to work with, right? And coaching, I can't tell you enough. I know I'm a coach and I'm not trying to sell myself. What I'm trying to do is sell you on the idea that we are our worst self-assessors. We need somebody who's a third party to be able to, or a second set of eyes on observing our behavior that helps us. So the organization that is going to grow is going to support those things.
Awesome, Patty. Thank you. And Simone, these brouhahas and kerfuffles have impacts on our emotional well-being sometimes. How do we navigate through that? How do we make sure that our mental health, not that I have any of that, and our emotional health are okay?
Patty's brought up some really good points. Emotions drive people and people drive performance. It's a pretty simple equation from that perspective, but we often get caught up in our own reactions and forget the vulnerability of the people that are in front of us. And there are intense pressures, disconnections, shutdowns, and there are some leaders, because we haven't had the continuous training, forget the word training, absolutely. It's a continual experience that we have and learn from. And some leaders are, I don't have time for this people stuff. Your job is people. That's how you get stuff done. So, a leader might not always be loved nor even hated. I think one of the worst responses that you can experience as a leader from your people is apathy, because that's just, I don't care anymore. They just, whatever, And so I really believe that a leader has to continue to try and adjust their approaches. Even Churchill has said success isn't final, because failure is not fatal. It's actually the courage to keep continuing to do what counts. And you got to do what counts. And that means that, if you want people to be creative and innovative, guess what? That's emotional. If you're going to put the positive emotions in, you got to learn to deal with the complex, messy ones as well. That's what they're there. The sorry, the worry, the anger. These are still valuable feelings, because that's what these kerfufflos have been telling you. There's something happening here. Keep that finger on the pulse. I had one of my bosses. I worked with him very well. I was, running at various departments, and so I was reporting direct into the CEO here. And because he wasn't, say, an emotional type person, he'd just take one look at my face as I stood at the door, and he'd say, "Oh, is it time for me to do my there, dear pat on the back moment?" That was the extent of his ability to show it. But I kind of understood him in a way. And so I created in my own office for my people here's something practical, called Windy Corner, because it gave them a psychologically safe space. They could come into my office and just go blah. It didn't matter what the blah was. Just come into my office and go blah. And in doing that, I can then say to them, okay, they can come and vent. But then I'm going to ask them, say, all right, are you just needing to have a blah because you're just debriefing before you get on with your next thing? Or do you actually want me to do something, right now? Or do you need to go away and chew on that, and then we'll work something out? So you just give them the space and the opportunity and the understanding that that's what, be generous with your time. Empathy is not about fixing people. Stop trying to fix your people. All right. It's just about listening and providing that space, so the connections and the relationships for them to find that balance can happen. When they feel that safety, they're more open. That risk of sharing information is minimized for them. And, you're adding to their adaptation toolbox. You're helping them build their resilience, because you can't build their resilience. They have to do that for themselves. But you've got to provide them those methods and tools and techniques to do that. I mean, Charles de Montesquieu, since I'm in France, he was a French political philosopher back in the 1600s during the Enlightenment period. One of his principles works was the spirit of laws, which applies to political theory. But hey, organizations, what can I say? They are political in the way they operate a lot of the time. But he said, happiness is not the absence of problems. It's the ability to deal with them. So I will always come back to my principles, not just for the mental and emotional well-being of my staff, but just in the way we build into our strategy, our knowledge, the way we provide the capability for everyone is, first of all, you've got to have your people connected. Nothing else is going to happen if that isn't in place. It's only when they're connected that you can share your knowledge, that you can then discover those possibilities, whether it's kerfuffles and brouhahas and everything else. But this is where the relationships are formed. And then you can realize your potential.
Good advice there, Simone. So I'm going to put us back in gallery view here on YouTube. Everybody can see everyone now. And we have a little bit of time for some parting thoughts. NJ, Kathy, Matt, do you have some closing thoughts for today? No? Yes? Somebody's got some.
Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, please, NJ. As I was gonna say, we all always have thoughts, right? We just need to figure out who's gonna go first. NJ, go ahead.
Just great input there. As a leader, communication is so important, but also creating a safe space for conflict it's vital, because it's going to happen. And love that quote that Simone just kind of gave out about happiness is not the absence of problems. So true, so true. I'm probably going to put that somewhere on LinkedIn or in my office. So great being with the team, and love hearing you all.
Matt, did you want to chime in, or do you want me to share a little?
I'll chime in if you want to wrap it up. I'm sure you'll have something more profound to say than I do.
But
just a couple other thoughts I had. I posted something about Simone, you were talking about creating that safe space for people to talk, and that's wonderful. I'm a big proponent of an ombuds person in any organization whenever it is affordable, because a lot of times the toxic cultures don't have the trust, and so they won't come to the leaders and talk to you, and that becomes a challenge, because you can say we have a safe space that no one ever uses. That's weird. That's your fear, right? That should be a thing right there. As far as it goes, not only is it psychological safety, but there's also just the power dynamics. I think hierarchy and privilege, entitlement, nepotism, all the things that we could get into probably in 1,000 other discussions can make that conversation not happen or make it not effective. So that's something. And the last thing I wanted to just finish with another thank you to Simone. Sorry to keep picking on you, but you mentioned compromise and having it be the communicated promise. In school, we learned about the 5 styles of conflict, right? Thomas or something. And, there's accommodating, avoiding, and compromise is always looked at as like, that's what we should do. But I was always taught that is a lose-lose. No matter how you look at it, right? It is a lose-lose. You're each giving up something. You're not expanding the pie. And so there's the negotiation side, and then there's that mediation side, which wants that collaborative approach of let's expand the pie. Let's win-win. But if you can't have those deep conversations, if you can't listen to your team, there's not going to be any pie to expand, and you will compromise. Not that it's bad, but thank you for changing my perspective of, I literally just translate that word as lose-lose. Well, if you communicate a promise and you live up to it, you can start to build that trust and shift closer, I think, to those better conversations along the way. So thanks for having me along, guys. Greg, I appreciate the awareness. So
thanks, Matt. Thank you. Thanks for coming by. NJ, you have some thoughts of wrapping up today, or?
Nope, I'm good. I think Kathy had something.
I think he did. I'll keep mine very, very short, but something I've been thinking about more recently. But if you think of everything we've talked about, and for those that have watched our series of helping us all become the leaders that are so needed in the current times, this isn't for the faint of heart. You know, what we talked about today takes a lot of energy. You have to be there, you have to be present, you have to be constantly looking and seeking and just have your thumb on the pulse of your team and the company and everything. You know, if you want to be a good leader, if you want to see change, if you want to see the results that is expected of your team, you're going to have to be willing to do the hard work.
What? There's hard work? What?
Absolutely.
Mostly fun.
It's interesting in advising companies, you know, over the years. A lot of times I would get someone who wanted me just to provide the solution to them. Like, okay, they were successful. Why can't we just copy them? Because you're your own organization. And well, how does this happen? You work on it. The unfortunate bearer of the fact that, you know, people have to work. So in any event, it's been a great session today. We have heard the kerfuffles. We have crafted the brouhaha. And I don't, perhaps the folks on the West Coast would like to like have breakfast now or something like that. You know, what a concept. Anyway, this has been episode 47 of KTLO, keeping the learning on. Kathy says keeping the learning up. So we have KTLU. See you soon. Bye.